Chief Investment Strategist for EMEA and APAC is still with us. Walter, what is your view on commodities, whether the gains that we've seen this week can be sustained, and what in that complex is looking most attractive to you?
Sure. So clearly this week is also a bit of a reaction to the very tough weeks we've had leading up to this. I mean, we all know that commodities had a bit of a downtick last month, and now they're recovering from that downtick. So that's good to see. We are overweight the asset class. We do think that as a play on the economic recovery, it's still a good place to be. We like to take that exposure through equity exposure. So we take positions in commodity companies as opposed to the future complex, because we find that much more attractive from a rolling yield perspective. You get dividends as opposed to a headwind. But if you look at the underlying complex, it's really all about that economic growth picture. It's about what's happening in the US, what's happening in China, and that's where we still think there are gains to be made, including in the energy complex.
And in terms of the spread that you want to have on board, is it the metals and miners, the Billies, the Rios, the Anglos, that kind of metals and miners as complemented with big oil, or are you a little bit more wary on big oil because of COP26, the green agenda, the new narrative in terms of energy?
Sure. So from a structural basis, we are definitely a little bit more cautious on the energy complex. That's baked into our view already on a strategic time horizon, because that's simply a headwind that we don't think will go away. So we are already structurally overweight those more, like you said, those more metals types of exposures, as well as things like water, which we think is going to be long-term very important as well. So we already have that baked into our views, and that's part of where we take our exposure at the moment.
Wow, so how much of this is dependent on China ensuring that there is a floor under growth that is continuing to slow in that country? How dependent is that view on an increase in infrastructure spending, for example?
So the infrastructure side of things is an interesting point. We do think that's going to be a very modest, but still a positive impact on the natural resource complex, because there will be a little bit more demand for those natural resources. But you're absolutely right. From a global perspective, China is still the major player. We still need to acknowledge that they are the demand source of choice for many of these commodities. And if China goes one direction, so does the commodity complex. And again, we just want to highlight that we think from a Chinese growth perspective, we're transitioning from that recovery phase to that organic phase. We don't think Chinese growth will really undershoot relative to expectations. It's just a matter of managing that transition with the volatility in the data that brings. And we think the Chinese government, now that it's easing off and getting a little bit more supportive on the fiscal and the monetary side, we think that growth picture is pretty solid. So that's why we think commodities and natural resources are a good place to be.
That's it. Thank you for being with Tom and I this morning about this talking about Northern